Did you know that most leaders think that they're really good at giving feedback, but if you ask their teams, you're going to hear a completely different story. The truth is that most feedback completely misses the mark. It fails because it's too vague. Hey, good job on that project, buddy. But what the heck does that even mean? It fails because it's too personal. You're careless instead of addressing the actual behaviors. And it fails because it disappears into a black hole. Someone shares their thoughts and nothing ever happens. When feedback fails, it doesn't just waste time. It completely erodes trust. It kills initiative, and it leaves small problems to grow into really big ones. But here's the good news. Feedback doesn't have to fail. In fact, when it's done right, feedback can be the single most powerful tool that you have to build trust, resolve conflict, and unlock the full potential of your entire team. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to do it using my CLEAR framework, a system that I've relied on to lead teams in combat zones, embassies, and boardrooms alike. Hi, and welcome to the Everyday Diplomat. I'm Michael Forras, a retired Marine Sergeant Major, former U.S. diplomat, and someone who spent the better part of 20 years leading high-performing teams through crisis, conflict, and constant change. From combat zones to corporate boardrooms, one truth has stayed the same. If you can't build trust through feedback and resolve conflict, your team is never going to reach its full potential. And here's the thing. Most leaders think that they are doing this really well, but in reality, their teams are completely frustrated. They're disengaged or quietly pulling away because the feedback that they're getting isn't clear. It's not actionable, and it never leads to any real resolution. That's why today's video is so important. I'm going to walk you through a proven framework that has worked for me in some of the most demanding environments imaginable. And if it works there, it's going to work anywhere. So before we jump in, let me just say this. If you're looking for leadership tools that aren't fluff or theory, but things you can actually put into practice, like right away, you're in the right place. Go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any of the tools that we're building here each week together. Let's go ahead and start with the uncomfortable truth here. Most feedback fails. I don't mean it lands a little bit off. I mean it flat out fails. It doesn't build clarity, it doesn't improve performance, and it sure doesn't strengthen relationships. In fact, it often does the opposite. Think about the last time that you gave somebody feedback. Did it energize them? Did it give them direction and then improve the outcome? Or did it leave them defensive, confused, and perhaps even more disengaged than they were before? The reasons are pretty consistent. First, feedback is often too vague. Leaders think that they're being encouraging when they say things like, hey, good job on that project. But vague praise is completely forgettable. It doesn't reinforce any specific behavior, so it doesn't get repeated. Second, feedback gets way too personal. Instead of focusing on the action, leaders attack the individual. You're lazy, you're careless. When feedback starts to cross into identity, it doesn't inspire improvement, it triggers defensiveness. The message gets completely lost in their self-protection. And third, feedback is often unfinished. A conversation might happen, sure. Maybe it's even a really good one, but then it disappears into a black hole. No follow-up, no accountability, no visible change. When that happens, people stop speaking up. They think, why bother? Nothing's going to change here anyway. You ever hear that said around the office? I've seen all of this play out firsthand. Years ago, in one of my early leadership roles, I watched a very promising Marine spiral downhill. Not because he lacked ability, but because every piece of feedback that he got was either vague, hey, tighten up, or harsh, you're screwing this up. I mean, they didn't say screwing, but you know what I meant. He wasn't being told what to change or how to do better. He was just being labeled, and labels don't build people, they just break them down. By the time I stepped in, his confidence was shot and his trust in leadership was all but gone. It took time, but once we shifted into clear, specific, and actionable feedback, he completely turned it around. In fact, he went on to become one of the strongest leaders in the entire unit. Here's the lesson. Feedback isn't about checking a box or delivering a great speech. It's about creating clarity. Clarity on what's working, clarity on what's not, and clarity on what comes next. But here's the bigger truth here. Feedback is not an event. It's not a one-time conversation. Feedback is a process, and that process has to be deliberate. It has to be repeatable, and it has to build trust and not break it. That's exactly what we will cover in the next section. Call it a byproduct of 22 years as a Marine, but I like clearly defined systems that are easy to follow and, more importantly, provide easily repeatable results. That's why I created the CLEAR framework. It's a simple 5-step system that ensures your feedback does exactly what it's supposed to do: strengthen trust, improve performance, and move people and teams forward. So let's go ahead and break this down. First, we use calm words. The first step in making feedback effective is simple but powerful. It's calm. If you bring heat, they're going to bring shields. That's completely normal, and it's human nature. When emotions run high, feedback gets completely distorted. The other person isn't hearing your words. They're hearing your tone, your frustrations, your judgment. I learned this the hard way earlier in my career. I once lit into a Marine for missing a deadline. I was completely right about the mistake, but I was incredibly wrong about my approach. My frustration didn't help him fix the issue. It made him defensive and angry. The deadline didn't get any closer to being met. When I pulled him aside the next day, after I had time to actually cool down and think it over, the conversation was completely different. I was calm, he was receptive, and together we came up with a solution. That moment drove home a very important lesson for me. Your state as a leader sets the tone for the entire exchange. So before you ever give any feedback, go ahead and check yourself first. Regulate your emotions, breathe, do whatever you have to do, and get calm. Only then will your message land the way that you intend. The second step here is listen. Most leaders think that feedback means talking, but real feedback starts with listening. When you take the time to listen, you communicate respect. You show the other person that their perspective actually matters and that you're not just there to lecture, you're there to really understand. In Silicon Valley, I worked with innovators who brought forward some pretty wild ideas, and at first glance, many of those ideas looked completely unrealistic. But by listening, I mean really listening, I discovered nuggets of brilliance that would have been completely lost had I shut them down too quickly. In leadership, listening creates buy-in. People are far more likely to accept feedback if they feel that they've been heard. It turns a one-way critique into a two-way conversation. Here's a simple practice. Before you give your perspective, go ahead and ask questions. How do you think that went? What was your intent behind that decision? Then you go ahead and listen. Not just for the words, but for the intent, the emotions, and that underlying set of concerns that aren't vocally voiced. When people feel heard, they stop resisting, and when resistance drops, growth is going to begin. For those of you following along, we are on E, and the third step is in fact to evaluate. This is where most leaders completely miss the mark. They react to what's on the surface instead of actually digging deeper. Two employees arguing in a meeting, the leader thinks that they just don't get along, but more often than not, the conflict isn't personal, it's a symptom. Maybe expectations weren't clear, maybe roles overlapped, maybe resources were short. I've seen this time and time again. Once in an aviation unit, two sections were constantly at odds with one another. On the surface, it just looked like personalities clashing, but when I slowed down to actually evaluate, I discovered that their reporting structures completely overlapped, meaning that they were both being told to prioritize different things by two different chains of leadership. No wonder they were frustrated. The real problem wasn't them, it was the system itself. When you evaluate, don't just react to what you see. You need to ask what's really driving this. Is it the person or is it the process? When you get to the root, you actually fix the problems permanently instead of just putting out the fires. The fourth step is to act. Feedback without action is just words. Once you've calmed yourself, listened, and evaluated, you have to move. You have to put clarity into practice. This means being completely specific. Here's what went wrong, here's what needs to change, and here's how we'll measure what improvement and success actually looks like. It means following through on after-action reviews, implementing new habits, and modeling the type of behavior that you yourself want to see. In the Marines, after every mission and every operation, we did after-action reviews. They weren't about blame, they were about action. We asked what worked, what didn't work, what are we going to do differently next time? Then we would act on it. That culture of constant adjustment, it's what kept us sharp and ready and doing better the next go-around. Feedback must move from conversation to consistent action. Otherwise, it's just noise. The final step here is repair. Even with the best feedback, relationships sometimes get strained. Maybe your delivery wasn't perfect. Maybe the person didn't respond well. Okay, that's normal. What matters is what you do next. Repair means closing the loop. It means circling back to say things like, hey, I heard you. Here's what we adjusted. Here's why we made the decisions that we did. It shows people that their input actually mattered, even if you couldn't implement every single thing that they suggested. I'll never forget one unit I inherited as a senior leader. Morale was completely in the tank. People had stopped giving feedback because for years, nothing had ever changed. To turn it around, we didn't just start asking for input. We repaired trust by showing that we were actually acting on it. We made changes where we could. We explained where we couldn't. And we kept on following up. Slowly, people began to believe again. Repair is how you build a cycle of trust. Without it, feedback dies. And with it, feedback fuels growth. So remember, calm, listen, evaluate, act, and repair. Clear? That's the process. And that's why your first days in leadership, they matter so much. You can have the right framework, but if you stumble out of the gate, it can take months or even years to recover your credibility. That's exactly why I built the First 30 Days. It's an online course designed specifically for newly promoted or first-time leaders. It's built to help you step into a new role with confidence, earn respect very quickly, and avoid the mistakes that sink your credibility early. The promise here is simple. You'll go from unsure and anxious to respected and in control without overcompensating, overstepping, or guessing your way through those first critical weeks. And right now, to celebrate the launch of this course, it's available for just $75, but only until the end of this week. After that, it returns to its normal price of $97. When you head to checkout, make sure you use the promo code that should be popping up on the screen right about here. Just kidding. It's going to be right there. If you're stepping into leadership or you know that you will be soon, go ahead and check out the link in the description below and grab it while the discount's live. I'd be honored to have you join us inside. Here's the truth. Feedback won't transform your team if it only shows up once in a while. If feedback is rare, it's gonna feel like judgment. If feedback is routine, it's gonna feel like learning. That's why leaders have to build feedback into the culture of their team, not as a surprise and not as a punishment, but as a rhythm. Here are 3 simple ways for you to do that. The first one is after action reviews. In the Marines, after every mission, successful or not, we ran quick after action reports. The format was very simple. What worked? What didn't? What will we do differently next time? The key wasn't blame, it was just growth. When your team expects that type of rhythm, feedback is going to become normal. Second, weekly check-ins. It doesn't have to be a long meeting. Even a 10-15-minute one can completely reset priorities. It can surface issues and make feedback a natural part of the conversation. When people know that they'll have a chance to talk openly every week, little problems don't have time to grow into big ones. Third, we have peer feedback circles. Leaders aren't the only ones who give feedback. Some of the very best insights that I've ever received have come from my peers or my subordinates alike. Encouraging your team to share observations with each other builds collaboration and accountability at every single level. The goal is to normalize feedback so it's not scary anymore. When it happens all the time in structured, predictable ways, it stops feeling like an attack and starts feeling like part of the actual process. And here's the bigger picture. When feedback is cultural, conflict doesn't fester. It gets resolved really quickly and constructively and with respect. People don't walk around with hidden resentment stored inside. They speak up, they get heard, and then they move forward. That's how high-performing teams operate, not because they avoid conflict, but because they handle it really well. So, as a leader, don't wait for those big moments. Build feedback into the daily rhythm. Make it part of your team's DNA. Feedback isn't just something that you give, it's something that you live. So here's the big idea that I want you to walk away with today. Feedback isn't about criticism. It isn't about proving somebody else wrong. It's about clarity. It's about connection. And it's about continuous growth. When you use the clear framework, calm, listen, evaluate, act, and repair, you take feedback out of the danger zone and turn it into one of the most powerful leadership tools that you're ever going to have. My challenge to you this week is very simple. Pick one step of clear and put it into practice. Maybe it's pausing to calm yourself before a tough conversation. Maybe it's taking an extra 5 minutes to listen before you talk. Maybe it's circling back to repair a relationship that you know has been strained a little bit. Just one step this week. put it into action, and watch how it changes the tone of your conversations. And if you want to keep building your leadership toolkit, I send out a weekly newsletter called the Diplomat's Dispatch. It's where I share insights you won't see anywhere else. And when you sign up, I'll send you my free guide, 10 Things to Never Say as a Leader. The link is in the description below. Finally, don't miss our next video because we're going to tackle something that hits home for almost every leader. It's the 5 biggest mistakes that leaders make with feedback and then how to fix them. Go ahead and subscribe, and I'll see you there.